All right, so my name is Jason Mitchell, and I work at Valve, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some non-photorealistic rendering techniques that we're using in Team Fortress 2, which is coming out in another couple of months. So I guess it's kind of a little bit of a different tack from the topics that, other topics in the course and other things that we've presented in the past, in that there's going to be a sort of a larger kind of art component to this. But so far, I think I'm going to have the biggest equation, at least in terms of font size, and we'll have that at the end. So don't worry, it's not all this art stuff. So we'll talk about initially motivations and related work, and sort of why we've done this for Team Fortress and other things that have come before us. We'll spend some time talking about our guiding principles for designing the environments for Team Fortress 2. And then we'll spend the bulk of the time talking about characters from both a design standpoint and go into the actual gritty details of the lighting equations used in the actual interactive shading on the characters, and conclude with some ideas for future work. So if you're not familiar with what Team Fortress 2 is, it's a class-based multiplayer game, which is going to come out soon. And the class-based part of that is really critical in the sense that the players have the ability to choose from one of 9 different characters. This guy's the pyro right here. He's got a big old flamethrower. And nobody else has a flamethrower. They have other different weapons. And so each class is quite specialized based on their capabilities. And so they're really absolutely the core of any gameplay aspect in Team Fortress 2. And people who have play tested or seen Team Fortress 2 in action already have come away with one major impression, which is about its unique visual style. And this was chosen very specifically to serve gameplay goals, in particular to reinforce this class idea. In the sense that Team Fortress, first of all, has always, since the original mod, featured very over-the-top violence and jibbing and rocket jumping and all this kind of insanity, right? So, it kind of fits well in a non-photorealistic world, actually. Those things actually gel really, really well. But really, for a graphics audience, kind of the central goal of this, though, is to focus on the ways in which this increases the readability of characters, in the sense that players can quickly, readily identify each other from all different viewpoints and all different lighting conditions within our game world. And of course, it doesn't hurt that this looks like no other game out there right now, so differentiability is a good thing, differentiation. So if you haven't seen it before, here's a quick look, some renderings from Team Fortress 2. So here's all the character classes, kind of hanging out here, showing off. Little attitude here from the pyro. Actually, a lot of that kind of stuff going on in the game. It's pretty funny. Here's Well, the red team. You can see there's leaving their base, heading off to this sort of neutral ground in the middle here, and they'll try not to get hit by that train, and then meet up with the blue team, contending for that middle cap point there. This is probably the most placid view of Team Fortress 2 you'll ever have. In the sense that you'll probably be playing it in the future and looking down the barrel of a gun instead. So when you looked at that environment there, you notice probably a couple different things, a very specific color scheme and use for the red and the blue forts, sort of desaturated colors used throughout. We had a lot of intentional design principles, in particular focusing on value contrast when laying out, for example, the ground and the buildings and the sky beyond. And what I mean by value, of course, is as in hue saturation and value color space, the value of a particular hue. And so in this image here, which is more or less monochromatic, you can see that this is an example of the ground and buildings and sky having very different values. And our artists tend to think a lot that way when they're building things for Team Fortress 2. In fact, we even have a mode in our engine where they can go in the game and look at it and just see value and sort of evaluate their work that way. And we also wanted to embrace very simple forms. This was consistent with a lot of the sort of reference art, artists that came before Team Fortress, and a lot of our internal concept art, and really also serves the goal of having an uncluttered canvas upon which to draw our characters. We don't want to have players have any trouble sorting each other out from unnecessary detail in the background. It's pretty wacky. So you saw the characters there. And if you're familiar with the kind of gameplay style in Team Fortress 2, you might want to be tempted to make a lot of really weird, off-kilter, wacky kind of shapes and stuff. But we kind of tried to keep it simple and clean and minimize any visual noise. For the different bases, we had very specific design goals. You can see the concept art here with the red team base on the top and blue on the bottom. Very warm natural colors, natural materials and angular shapes for red. Very cool industrial orthogonal kind of forms for blue. And here's Two Fort, the blue base, very boxy and industrial kind of look to it. You can see the sniper nest up there if you're looking for that right now. And then likewise the sort of analogous side with the red base in Two Fort with the similar with the guiding design principles there, but similar structure. And you can see the sniper nest right in the middle there. That's where you get sniped from when you get this fall. So naturally, because we're leveraging the same game engine that we use for games like Half-Life 2 and Counter-Strike and so on, we can borrow a lot of photorealistic techniques such as our radiosity, generated light maps, particle systems, reflective, refractive water, all that kind of stuff. So a lot of the look of the world design in Team Fortress 2 comes from the art, from the hand-painted textures, which have very loose, visible brush strokes, and we make no attempt to really hide the painterly nature. We actually really want to embrace the visible brush strokes. I think there's actually one level that has some hay out on the floor, and the hay is really represented as just really visible brush strokes defining kind of the shape of the hay, which is pretty wild. We draw very consistently from this color palette here, both for the world and for the characters. And you can see while we do have distinct hues for the red and blue teams, they're fairly desaturated. Right, so this kind of idea of having brushstrokes appear in 2D textures means that you're going to see them in perspective in the 3D world. And this is really not something actually new and unique to 3D graphics. In fact, this is something you can see in background plates from Hayao Miyazaki. In the image on the left, these two images are both from the same space, from Spirited Away. And the image on the left, you can see that wall is kind of close to the parallel to the image plane itself. And you can see very clear red brush strokes on that wall. They're meant to be visible. And the image on the right-hand side of the slide, that wall is in perspective. And if we kind of visually pick out one particular brush stroke, we can see its width and screen space. And then look further back on the wall, we can see another brush stroke, and its width is actually foreshortened. Miyazaki has specifically tried to go for this goal of making his brushstrokes appear in perspective in the 3D world as opposed to on the 2D image plane, which is a look that we like, and also, of course, we like the idea that we don't have to really tackle the non-photorealistic rendering problems of getting a screen space painterly look, which tends to be sort of fatiguing and distracting, and you get a lot of shower door artifacts and things. We didn't want to be distracting to our players. We still want to embrace that kind of style. So here are some examples of these kinds of these 2D textures applied on our 3D geometry, and you'll be able to pick out some pretty clear brush strokes. This sort of tan-colored floor here, there's definitely some very loose brush strokes. And on the wooden planks that we're just about to pan over here on the left, they're just clearly painted. You can see there's a really obvious visible brush stroke on the roof right there as well. And this is a big part of the look of Team Fortress. And because we've had this really intentional palette, so that we have our red and blue sort of analogous colors that we use for the analogous bases of the two teams in the game, and we have fairly desaturated colors in general, we can break those rules for things that we want to emphasize. So we can take colors that are very far from red and blue, so like this green health kit or these yellow these yellow gates that are very saturated as opposed to the desaturated backdrops, and they'll really pop off the background. And so these belong to neither team. They're neither red nor blue, so anybody can go pick it up and get health or try and avoid getting hit by the trains that come racing out of there from time to time. So here's an example of what that looks like in game. You can see that guy kind of pops right off the background. That's why I didn't do that. Okay. So, so that was kind of a brief look at how we think about world design in Team Fortress 2, and now we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about characters. We had some really specific design goals that were driven by the game play in Team Fortress 2. We needed the players to be very easily visible against the environment, quickly identifiable by class and by team, and what weapon was equipped by other players. And we wanted to communicate this via shape and shading and silhouette under all lighting conditions in our environments. So we looked to the non-photorealistic rendering literature for some ideas in this space. One work that's probably most similar to what we're doing in Team Fortress 2 is the work of Gooch from 1998. And what they did was they looked at technical illustrations and came up with this idea of using hue and luminance shifts to communicate surface orientation. So the basic idea being that in any diffuse lighting that you do in all of your games, you have this n.l for a diffuse Lambertian term. They would take that n.l and scale and bias it so that rather than being in the -1 to 1 range, it would be in the 0 to 1 range. And they'd use that essentially as a blend factor between these two other colors that are a function of kind of a warm yellow and a cool blue and the underlying albedo of the material itself. And you can see that what they gain from that. On the column on the right, those are good shaded spheres. And there's a light to the upper right-hand side there. And the conventional shading spheres on the left-hand column, they have no shape or definition on the back side relative to that light source because they've clamped that n.l and use just a constant ambient there. Whereas Gooch has this consistent shift of luminance and hue, so you always get some sense of shape across your object. Now in 2000, again, more literature from the NPR community, Lake sought to do kind of the exact opposite of this in the sense of taking that Lambertian term and actually reducing the amount of information that it communicates to you in order to achieve this stylized, cartoonish look. So they would take that n.l, scale and bias it again to get it in 0 to 1 so they can actually access a 1D texture, which contains, on the one half, it would contain a light color, and on the other half, a dark color. And they also recognize the generality of this idea of taking your lighting term and looking into this arbitrary function that an artist can paint, and sort of and proposed putting like maybe a little white texel up at the right-hand side of that texture. And am I losing my mic? Okay, of that texture there, so they could get sort of a pseudo-specular highlight. It's still just based on the n.l, but it gives you kind of a sense of a specular. More recently, at NPAR last year, Barla extended that technique by adding an additional dimension and accessing that additional texture dimension in 2D texture with another texture coordinate, which could be one of a few different things. The stuff that's the most similar to what we do in Team Fortress 2 is using an n.v raised to a power. So this is like a Fresnel term, which is something that you probably use certainly for water. Taking the view vector and the normal vector, dotting those, usually raise them to a power, subtract them from 1, use that as a blend factor in your lighting equations. And that can be used to give sort of a virtual backlight or a rim highlight kind of term. We also look much further back than recent NPR literature to illustration from the early part of the 20th century, particularly the work of J.C. Leindecker, and identified some really key aspects of his art that we wanted to be able to emulate using our shading techniques in Team Fortress 2. Specifically this idea, the same as Gooch, where there's this warm to cool hue shift, and the shadows don't go to black, but they go to a cool color. The saturation on objects often is increased at the terminator. That is the place where the Lambertian term crosses 0. The clothing folds are really a big emphasis for making strong silhouettes and defining shapes of characters. And use of rim highlights is also really central. So here are some examples of this from Leindecker's work. For example, we can see here on these characters, he's placed sort of this green light back behind them to cast this green highlight just along the rim of the forehead and the hair and the shoulder there to set them off from the black background. And we really like this look. It prevented him from having to use dark outlines on his illustrations to define the silhouette shapes. And it's something that we wanted to use as well to define our silhouettes. And you can see on these boys swimming here as well that the terminator, that is the place where something goes from being back-facing to front-facing, or where the n.l crosses 0 with respect to a given light, gets kind of red and more saturated. And this is particularly appropriate for skin, given its subsurface scattering properties. And Leindecker also was really into folds, and using folds to define shape internal to an object as well as define really strong silhouettes. And this was really interesting to us both from a stylistic standpoint and from the idea that the folds, especially if you look at the one on the cuff, on the arm of the football player there, that's something that's going to basically have the same shape even under rotation. So we're going to be able to see that character from different angles and still get that kind of look affecting the silhouette, which is something that we want. And you can see this reflected a little bit in some of our concept art here. In particular, the fabric on the engineer class from Team Fortress 2. And I've mentioned this idea of a rim highlight a couple times here so far, and the Francke term. So if you're not familiar with what this is, we have some illustrators on staff, and this was kind of an early frame from an animation that I'm going to show you actually at the end of the talk that one of our illustrators kind of took during the middle of development and overpainted to communicate to me how effective rim lighting really is. So you can see that this is something that the traditional 2D artists who think a lot about 2D image composition, this is the kind of thing that they paint in and use this device a lot. And I'll go back to that image that we were initially rendering. And then this is a hand-drawn rim highlight over the top. And this was what made me go write the shader code to make this happen. It was really compelling. So when we think about making these characters identifiable in Team Fortress 2, we think of the player as going through sort of this read hierarchy. There's kind of 3 phases that a player undergoes when they first encounter another player in the game. First, we want them to be able to identify what team they're on, and so they can sort of just quickly see the color, red or blue, friend or foe, is he on my team or not. After that, we want them to be able to really quickly identify the class of that character. So are they going to run? Are they going to attack? Are they going to team up with that guy if he's on the same team? Do they have complementary skills? Are they a good counter for one or the other? There's a lot of rock, paper, scissors kind of stuff going on here. And so we gave these guys very distinct body proportions. You can see there's some really skinny guys in the silhouettes we have of the 9 classes across the top of the slide. Some sort of bigger guys, some guys with big old hats, little skinny shoes. There's lots of variation in the sort of cuffing of pants to give us those internal and silhouette shapes caused by the wrinkling in the fabrics, which is also echoed in the normal maps that become visible when we start to actually shade the characters in. And so you can see once we've colored them in, we have some other conventions as well, in that we have this sort of dark to light gradient that we use from the foot to the chest height. The Pyro, who's in the very center, is the most obvious. Of course, he's a little charred, I think, but he goes from dark to light, from his feet to his waist, to again draw the viewer's eye up to that location. And that's where also a lot of the sort of high-frequency details are. All the logos and sort of clothing changes and things are all around the chest level to draw your eye there, which is the last read, which is the weapon, which is another critical piece of information for Team Fortress gameplay. All right, so that kind of sums up our design goals for the characters, and now we're going to get into what I hope is the biggest equation so far. So sitting through the art was worth it. I actually am really excited about the interplay between art and engineering that I see in particular coming out in the work in Team Fortress 2. It's really been a blast to work with the artists on this, and basically every innovation here has come directly from artists' input. So this is our lighting equation from Team Fortress 2. We'll break this cleanly along the lines of view-independent and view-dependent terms, and then we'll sort of drill down and break this down to give you a sense of kind of the novel things that we're doing here in real time to meet those design goals and use some of those same kind of visual cues that we saw in real illustrations. So the view-independent terms look a little like this. So the first one here, this A of n, so this is this ambient function of the normal. This is something that you've probably seen us present before. It's a spatially varying directional ambient term. This is something we've been using since Half-Life 2. During our radiosity solve, we compute these irradiance environment maps around our environment, around our game worlds, using this novel basis that we call ambient cube. Sort of all together, you can think of these as an irradiance volume. And you can see that the benefit of this, the character is picking up sort of a red spill from the screen left side, and kind of some blue sort of skylight from the screen right side there, so rather than having just a dark, shapeless ambient like you might have otherwise. We're going to have some modified Lambertian terms, and we'll drill down into those next. We'll take our usual n.l term, this is unclamped, so this is in the full -1 to 1 range, will scale and bias and raise it to a power. That's something that we do in all of our games, actually, and I'll go into a little more detail on that. The scale and bias are 1/2 and 1/2, so we have that same term that we saw in the Gooch slide earlier. So we have the 0 to 1 value that we then can put it into this function W, which is just a lookup into a 1D texture map. And now this particular 1D texture is something that our artists painted to try and mimic the sort of things that they were seeing in Leindecker's illustrations. And the things that are important to note on this are the sort of general dark gradient on the left-hand side. It's from very black to something less black in the middle. And then likewise from a bright white on the right toward the center of the texture. But in the middle, the transition from light to dark is kind of compressed and tightened into this little band, which is something that we observed in the paintings. And it also has a little bit of a red tint. So it tends to act as a filter on the light color to sort of favor the red light coming through. And you can see that what that does to the character's arm running at this diagonal here is the terminator. The terminator is not a hard tune shade thing. It's very intentionally not that. But it is kind of tight, and it does have kind of a red look to it. The light is off in the distance, and sort of it's an orange sunset, which is where you're getting the yellow coming from the other side there. And the weapon, you'll notice, doesn't have this red tint on it. The artists can specify different 1D textures for those, and so they've chosen sort of a harder grayer kind of transition on the weapon, so that's something that can vary for different materials. So summing those together, we get our bounced light from the ambient term in there. Of course, we have our base map albedo that's painted by our artists, and we can modulate that all together, and we get our diffuse lighting. As I mentioned before, we have this ambient cube, and this is something that we've shipped in all of our games since HL2. Let's see. All right. And actually, I'll just let you refer to some notes from last year if you want to look into that more. We have some more comparisons of that to spherical harmonics and whatnot in the past. And we'll move on to the view-dependent terms, which is sort of where the more novel work lies here. The first thing that you'll notice that's a little strange about the view-dependent terms here is that there are 2 Phong terms per light. That outer summation, that sigma there, is going to loop over light, so we support up to 4 local lights. And these 2 Phong terms will be used for, the one on the left is more of a material-specific one. That's one that will vary based on what the material is. And the one on the right is one that we think of as kind of a specific rim highlight term that's going to be associated with a given light. The rim highlight has this sort of broad constant exponent, and the material-specific one, as you can imagine, has some material-specific exponents. For the body and the weapon, you can see they're constant. If you look over the guy's shoulder a little bit, you can see his beard and his skin have different exponents. This is just the exponent viewed in grayscale here, and our artists have painted the texture for the head to give a varied specular exponent there. There are also different Fresnel terms for these 2 different terms. The one on the left is sort of an artist-tuned one. You can see this one's been kicked up a lot. It's really bright. In fact, I think the values there are higher than 1 even. They wanted to really kick up the Fresnel on that. But there is still a little bit of view dependence to it, because you can see it's darker on the normals that are facing us. For the other Phong term, we have a more traditional kind of a Fresnel term that's sort of harsher kind of fall off. It's dark facing us. We have an optional rim mask texture, which is used for problem cases. A couple examples there would be we might get rim highlights around, if there's a light behind a character, we might get rim highlights around the nostrils and lips and things like that, which they aren't really true silhouettes, but as far as the math is concerned, you're going to get highlights there anyways, and we want to be able to mask out problem cases like that. This character didn't need that mask, so I'm not showing it, but that's what that particular term is for. Of course, we do have this specular mask texture, which gets modulated with both of these terms, and this is just your typical thing. It's like your base map you have for diffuse. This is your term that gets to multiply against your specular, so you can attenuate or knock stuff out. You can see the weapons obviously started out as an ambient occlusion texture. So looking at the material-specific term for this particular guy here, for that sunlight that's kind of off the screen right there. You can see that there's sort of broader highlights on his skin, but sort of tighter, brighter highlights on the metallic weapon, sort of harder surface with a different exponent. But for the for the sort of the rim Phong term, it's a very sort of uniform rim that we get everywhere. And so combining those two together, we take the max. You can see there, I'll kind of go back and forth. So there's the max of those two terms. We didn't really want to add them together, so we'd get kind of double lighting. So we take the max of that to get our Phong contribution for the two Phong terms. Now, as you know, if you're game developers, it's certainly common for NPCs or player characters to move away from the light sources that were placed in your environments by your designers. And oftentimes they can just go really flat, or if you're lucky, you have some kind of directional kind of ambient term, so they can at least pick up some kind of bounce light. Same, of course, is going to happen for your specular terms, and we didn't really want that to happen, particularly in the case of the rim lighting. So we wanted to come up with a rim term that was kind of always going to be there, not overbearingly so, but was always going to be there. So what we do is we'll actually take that same ambient A function that we have that we used for the diffuse term, and we'll use the view vector. So the ray through the pixel will shoot for that guy to come up with kind of a color for the local lighting information that's bounced and created by our radiosity solve. We'll use the same rim mask. Again, this character didn't need one. The same Fresnel term as the sort of Fresnel Phong, or excuse me, the rim Phong. And also we take the normal dotted with the up vector. This is just to kind of make this term sort of seem to always come from above. The light sources do tend to come from above. I mean, as humans, we also just expect light to come from above. Sky's up there, ground's down there, that kind of thing. So this was just kind of an arbitrary term. Modulating those all together, we kind of get this additional illumination for our rim that kind of always lets our characters have some kind of rim highlight on them. Summing all of our view-dependent terms together, we get something that looks like this. Then we add those to our view-independent terms to get our final result. Okay, so video on Windows. Okay, so what I'll do now is I'll show you kind of a shot of some of this stuff in motion. This is, so you definitely kind of keep your eye out for this whole idea of the transition from light to dark to give the illustrative kind of look. You'll definitely see it on the character's fingers in this animation. And also keep an eye out for the rim highlighting that you'll see on the head and shoulders. In fact, this video is the one that we were working on when the artist took one of the frames and did that sort of blue painting over the top to show what he wanted to get from a rim term. And you'll see that rim term here executed. So I want to make sure we have audio on the PC.
I am heavy weapons guy. And this is my weapon. She weighs 150 kilograms and fires $200 custom tool cartridges at 10,000 rounds per minute. It costs $400,000 to fire this weapon for 12 seconds. Oh my God, who touched Sasha? All right. Who touched my gun? Some people think they can outsmart me. Maybe. Maybe. I've yet to meet one that can outsmart Bullet. Cry some more.
And he really does say cry some more in the game. It's quite hysterical, actually. all the characters have crazy things like that are going on. The facial animation system that you saw there really actually does run in real time. We rendered that out in non-real time. You can see some of the depth of field motion blur stuff going on there. But all the gameplay stuff there is totally rendered that way in the game, and the characters really do emote like that in the game. It's a lot of fun. So I'd like to talk a little bit about future work before we conclude and hopefully have a couple minutes for questions. Going forward, a couple things that we kind of left on the cutting room floor. We're going after some more flexible specular terms. In particular, some anisotropic highlights, a couple different flavors, like sort of a perlite flavor like you see from Heydrich in '98, or other styles that are sort of more appropriate for metals that are kind of more environment map based, shown in Gooch's technical illustration NPR work as well. There was a paper from Anjo a couple of years ago where they actually applied some operations to highlights to cause them to have shapes, maybe more squared off shape. They even split them to do the little square window thing that you drew on an apple when you were a kid, whenever you drew an apple. But in computer graphics for particular materials. Based on the curvature of an object, the width of the Fresnel term can vary a lot, and also based on the and of course that's a function of just the overall shape as well as the tessellation level. So we'd like to be able to come up with something a little more robust and reliable as far as guaranteeing certain widths of Fresnel terms. So what I'm pointing out there is that the foot around the ankle there has very high curvature and high tessellation, and there's a very narrow Fresnel kind of region there. So our rim highlight's going to be kind of nice and tight, and maybe the thing the artist would paint if he could. Whereas on the upper arm, we have really low tessellation and high curvature, or low curvature rather, and we get this broad kind of, kind of Garot artifact sort of thing. Just do the interpolation of the tangent frame across that polygon. Image space contrast enhancement is another NPR kind of technique that's come about in the last year or so that a lot of actual painters use to emphasize certain edges by increasing contrast, and this is something I think would fit really well with Team Fortress 2. And there was a paper presented at NPAR just the other day by DeCoro and his collaborators where they actually applied some modifications to shadow depth mapping, and one of the things that they did was abstract the shapes. So you can see this shape has some sort of little details on that pot there that don't appear in the shadow. It's a sort of simpler representation. I think that would work really well in Team Fortress as well. So in conclusion, we covered some motivations and related work. We talked about the design principles for our environments and our characters, and focused on interactive shading in particular, and how we brought this stuff to real time. Concluded with some ideas for future work. So I guess with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and open the floor to questions. We have one in the back there, and then you can mic.
Completely non-technical question. Why no female characters?
That's a raging debate. Stay tuned. Yeah, there was a question right here. You can go right ahead. I can hear you, and I'll repeat it. Right, so the question is about if we sort of overdid it with any of these terms at any point and actually ended up with some of these sort of more traditional, maybe physically based models conflicting with the ones that come from art. Certainly the idea of having to mask out things like the nostrils. Another good one is, it's the same problem, but like the weapon that the player is carrying around, which is like big on screen, sits in the palm of his hand as well. And so that area would pick up a rim, because there's no sense of occlusion there. So we'd have to sort of paint that rim mask as well. It's the same problem. We tended, in Half-Life 2 Episode 1 was when we first started sort of looking at some of these rim kind of terms, and we were intentionally really, really subtle about it because we really didn't want to wreck Alex. And so I think that in Team Fortress 2, even though it's pretty critical to the look, I can't think of any examples where we really stomped on what was already there. Got one in the back?
Yeah, I don't know how much this has to do with the rendering aspect of it, but you were talking about the facial animation and the, it seemed pretty flexible and pretty lifelike. I'm wondering if there are, if you could elaborate on that a little bit about, what kind of techniques you have to have in your engine to capture that.
Yeah, so we've invested a lot in our facial animation system. There are, I think the average number of morph targets in the frame of animation there was 167 out of the possible 600 that we have authored. It's a sophisticated facial animation system, and we are actually driving it on the graphics processor by rendering to vertex buffers and things like that. I think that we're going to be presenting more technical information about that as we get to the launch of Team Fortress, so I'd kind of rather wait. Sorry, I wish I could go into it.
That's cool.
Sorry.
Looks good.
All right, I guess that's it. Thanks.